I was standing just outside my own kitchen when I heard my son say in a voice I had never heard before, "She doesn't need to know until everything is finalized." My hands tightened around my walker, the small microphone hidden inside it, silently recording every word. My daughter whispered something I couldn't fully catch, but I heard fear in her voice. And in that moment, I realized something chilling. Whatever my children were planning, it wasn't for my benefit. It was against me. If this moment made your heart race even a little, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever felt something wasn't right in your own family? Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there. And if stories like this speak to you, don't forget to like and subscribe. I have a feeling this is only the beginning. My name is Bella Whitmore, and until a year and a half ago, I believed I understood my family. I had spent 42 years married to a man named Thomas Whitmore, a quiet, steady man who built his life the way he built everything else, carefully, patiently, and with purpose. He wasn't the kind of man who raised his voice or made grand promises, but when Thomas said something you could trust, it would hold. Our home, in a quiet suburb outside Columbus, Ohio, still carries his fingerprints in places most people wouldn't notice. The custom shelves in the study, the reinforced railings on the back porch, even the drawer in the kitchen that slides just a little smoother than the others, because he adjusted it himself one winter afternoon. When he passed away, it wasn't just grief that settled into the house. It was silence, the kind of silence that feels heavier than noise. For the first few months, I moved through that silence like a guest in my own life. I forgot where I put things. I left lights on in rooms I wasn't using. I would sit in the living room for hours staring at the armchair where Thomas used to read, expecting him to walk back in and ask me why I looked so lost. That was before the fall. It happened on a rainy Tuesday morning. I slipped on the back steps while trying to bring in a box of old tools from the garage. I remember the sharp crack of pain in my hip before I even hit the ground. After that, everything changed. Surgery, physical therapy, weeks of learning how to move again without fear, and eventually, the walker. I hated it at first. Not because it hurt my pride, though it did, but because of what it seemed to do to everyone else. The moment I started using that walker, people began speaking to me differently, slower, louder, as if I'd not just injured my hip, but lost something in my mind as well. My children were no exception. David, my oldest, stepped in almost immediately after the fall. He insisted it was temporary, that he was just helping me get organized while I recovered. At first, I was grateful. He handled grocery deliveries, sorted through bills, even called my insurance company when I felt too overwhelmed to deal with the endless hold music. But then, he didn't stop. Even after I was steady enough to move around on my own, David continued inserting himself into every part of my life. He would arrive unannounced with folders in his hands, talking about things like long-term planning and asset protection, in a tone that sounded more like a business meeting than a conversation between a son and his mother. "Mom, we just need to make things easier for you," he would say, sliding papers across the table. "You shouldn't have to worry about all this." At the time, I told myself he was being responsible, that he was stepping up in a way Thomas would have appreciated. Now I'm not so sure. Laura, my daughter, was different. She came by often, more than she used to before Thomas died, but there was always something unsettled about her. She would tidy up the kitchen, bring me soup, sit beside me on the couch, but her eyes never quite rested. They moved too quickly, like she was always thinking about something she didn't want to say out loud. More than once, I caught her starting a sentence only to stop halfway through and change the subject. "Mom, have you ever thought about," she would begin. And then, after a pause, she would force a small smile and say about repainting the hallway, "It's looking a little dull." At first, I thought it was grief. We were all carrying it differently, but there was something else there too, something heavier. Michael, my youngest, was the hardest to read because he wasn't there. He lived in Arizona, working a job that always seemed to demand just a little more of his time than he could give. He called every couple of weeks, always apologizing for not visiting more. "You know how it is, Mom," he would say. "Things are just busy right now." And maybe that was true. But whenever I tried to bring up anything serious, anything about David's involvement or Laura's strange behavior, he would gently steer the conversation away. "David's got it handled," he told me once. "You should trust him." That word trust stayed with me long after the call ended, because the truth was, I was starting to feel something I couldn't quite name. Not fear, not yet, but something close to it. It began with small things, easy to dismiss if you didn't look too closely. A letter from the bank that never made it into my hands. I saw it first in the mailbox, recognized the envelope immediately, but when I went back for it later, it was gone. When I asked David, he waved it off casually. "Just a statement, Mom. I already checked it. Nothing important, that's what he said." But Thomas had always taught me that financial documents were never nothing important. Then there were the phone calls. More than once, I picked up the house phone only to hear silence on the other end, followed by a quick disconnect. Caller ID showed David's number. When I mentioned it, he laughed. Probably just a glitch, he said. But it didn't feel like a glitch. It felt like someone hanging up because they realized I was listening. And then there were the conversations that stopped when I entered a room. That one is harder to explain if you've never experienced it. It's not just the silence, it's the way the air changes. The way two people who were just speaking suddenly become very interested in anything but each other. I noticed it first with David and Laura in the kitchen. I had been resting in my bedroom when I heard their voices low, urgent. I couldn't make out the words, but I could hear the tension. It pulled me out of bed before I even realized I was moving. I walked slowly down the hallway, leaning on my walker, careful not to make too much noise. As I reached the doorway, their voices cut off. Just like that. Laura turned toward me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Hey, Mom," she said brightly. "We were just talking about dinner. Dinner, at 2 p.m. I nodded, pretending to accept the explanation, but something inside me tightened. Because I had heard enough to know that wasn't true. Still, I said nothing. That was the pattern back then. Notice, doubt, dismiss, until the day I couldn't dismiss it anymore. It was late afternoon, the kind of gray Ohio day where the sky seems to press down on the house. I had gone into the living room to find my reading glasses when I heard David's voice from the kitchen. He was on the phone. At least that's what I thought at first. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. I really wasn't. But there was something about the way he was speaking, low-controlled, that made me stop. "She won't fight it," he said. There was a pause. Then more firmly, "Not if we move fast." I felt something cold settle in my chest. Move fast. Fight what I stood there, frozen, my hand still resting on the back of a chair. For a moment I considered walking in, asking him directly what he meant. But something held me back. Maybe it was the tone of his voice. Maybe it was the memory of that missing bank letter. Or maybe it was instinct, the kind Thomas always told me to trust. Instead of stepping forward, I stepped back, quietly, carefully. And for the first time in my life, I realized something I never thought I would have to consider about my own children. I didn't feel safe asking questions. I felt safer listening. That was the moment everything changed for me. Up until then, I had been living in a kind of quiet denial, telling myself that grief made people act strangely, that stress could explain sharp tones and hurried conversations, that maybe I was simply more sensitive than I used to be. But after hearing David say, "She won't fight it," not if we move fast, something inside me shifted. It wasn't fear exactly, it was clarity. And once clarity arrives, it's impossible to return to comfort. I didn't confront him that day. I didn't walk into the kitchen or ask what he meant. Instead, I did something that would have surprised even the version of me from a year ago. I paid attention. Really paid attention. The first thing I noticed was how often David mentioned paperwork, but never in detail. He would use vague phrases like just routine forms or standard updates. But whenever I asked for specifics, he had an answer ready that somehow explained everything without actually telling me anything. "Mom, it's just to make sure everything runs smoothly if you need help down the line," he said one evening, spreading documents across the dining table. What kind of help, I asked. He smiled too quickly. The usual. Medical decisions, financial coordination. Nothing you don't already trust me with. That word again, trust. I nodded slowly, but I didn't sign anything. I told him I wanted time to look things over, and for a brief moment, just a flicker, I saw something in his expression that didn't belong there. Impatience. Not concern, not understanding, impatience. He gathered the papers a little too quickly after that, tapping them into a neat stack as if the conversation had already ended in his mind. Of course, he said, no rush. But everything about him suggested the opposite. Laura, on the other hand, seemed to be unraveling. It showed in small ways at first. She would forget what she was saying mid-sentence. She would check her phone repeatedly, even when it hadn't made a sound. Once while washing dishes at my sink, I noticed her hands trembling slightly as she rinsed a plate. "Are you all right?" I asked, gently. She froze for just a second before forcing a smile. "Yeah, just tired." But it wasn't just tiredness. I knew my daughter. And this was something closer to fear. The next incident happened late one night. I had already gone to bed, the house quiet, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator down the hall. Must have dozed off for a while because the sudden ringing of the phone startled me awake. I reached for it instinctively. "Hello." There was silence on the other end. Then very faintly, I heard breathing. Not mine. Not the static kind of noise you get from a bad connection, but real human breathing. Uneven, hesitant. "Hello," I repeated, my voice sharper now. The line went dead. I stared at the phone for a long moment before slowly lowering it back onto the nightstand. The next morning, I checked the call log. It was Laura. When I asked her about it later that day, she looked confused at first, then quickly brushed it off. "Oh, I must have hit your number by accident," she said. "You know how phones are." I did know how phones were, and that wasn't how they worked. But I didn't press her, not yet. Instead, I began noticing patterns. David visited more frequently, but always during the day and always with a purpose. He brought folders, made calls from my kitchen, stepped outside when conversations turned serious. Laura visited at odd hours, early mornings, late evenings, and never stayed long. It was as if she was trying to check on something, or someone, without being seen doing it. And Michael remained distant. I called him one afternoon, determined to get a clearer sense of where he stood in all of this. "Hey, Mom," he answered, sounding distracted. "Hi, sweetheart," I said. "Do you have a minute?" "Yeah, of course." I hesitated, choosing my words carefully. "I've been meaning to ask, has David talked to you about anything lately? About me, I mean. About paperwork or plans?" There was a pause. "Too long." "Not really," he said finally. "Just that he's helping you get things organized." "Organized how?" Another pause. "I don't know, Mom. The usual stuff. Estate things, I guess." Something about his tone felt rehearsed. "Michael," I said softly, "do you trust what he's doing?" He let out a small sigh. "Mom, you're overthinking this. David's always been the responsible one. If he says he's handling it, then it's probably fine." Probably. Fine. Neither of those words gave me any comfort. I want to understand, I said. "I know," he replied, "but sometimes it's better not to stress yourself out over things like this. Just let him take care of it." And there it was again. Not reassurance, dismissal. We ended the call shortly after that, but the unease lingered, because for the first time I realized something important. Michael wasn't helping, but he wasn't questioning anything either. He had chosen the easiest role of all. Silence. The final moment that pushed me from suspicion into certainty came 2 days later. It was early afternoon, and I had been resting in my bedroom when I heard voices drifting down the hallway. David and Laura again. Their tones were low, urgent, just like before. I moved slowly, carefully gripping my walker as I approached the hallway. This time I didn't stop at the doorway. I stayed just out of sight, close enough to hear. "You're hesitating," David was saying, his voice tight with frustration. "We don't have time for that." "This isn't right," Laura whispered. "We should tell her no." He cut in sharply. "Absolutely not." There was a brief silence. Then Laura spoke again, her voice shaking. "What if she finds out she won't?" David said. "Not if we handle this properly, and if she doesn't sign another pause. Longer this time." When David spoke again, his voice had changed. It was colder, more calculated. Then we moved to the next step. My heart began to pound. "What next step?" Laura asked. David exhaled slowly, as if explaining something obvious. "We prove she can't manage things on her own." The words hit me like ice water. I felt my fingers tighten around the walker's handles, my breath catching in my throat. "She's still sharp," Laura said quickly. "You know that." "For now," he replied. "But it doesn't take much. A few evaluations, a couple of professional opinions. You'd be surprised how easy it is to establish concerns." I couldn't move. I couldn't think. All I could do was listen. Once that's in place, he continued, everything else falls into line. Everything else. My home, my finances, my independence, my life. Laura didn't respond right away. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. This isn't what Dad wanted. There it was again. Thomas. David's response came instantly sharp and dismissive. Dad's gone, Laura. And he left a mess we have to deal with. A mess. My husband's life reduced to a problem to be solved. I felt something inside me break in that moment, but it wasn't weakness. It was trust. And once it broke, it didn't come back. I stepped back from the hallway as quietly as I could, my heart pounding so loudly I was certain they would hear it. But they didn't. They kept talking, their voices fading into a blur as I retreated into my bedroom. I closed the door behind me and sat down slowly on the edge of the bed, staring at my hands. They were shaking. Not from age, not from weakness, but from something far more dangerous, understanding. Because now I knew. This wasn't confusion, this wasn't miscommunication, this was a plan, and I was the target. For the first time since Thomas died, I felt something stronger than grief. I felt the need to protect myself, and I realized something else too. If I wanted the truth, I wasn't going to get it by asking. I was going to have to find it. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard David's voice again, calm, controlled, explaining how easy it would be to prove that I couldn't manage my own life. The words didn't just echo in my mind, they settled into my bones. We prove she can't manage things on her own. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, feeling something inside me shift. Not panic, not helplessness, something steadier, something sharper. For the first time since Thomas died, I wasn't reacting to life. I was thinking ahead. And by the time the sun came up, I had made a decision I never imagined I would have to make about my own children. I was going to listen to them, without them knowing. The idea didn't come out of nowhere. It came from Thomas. Years ago, long before retirement, before the house felt quiet, before grief had softened everything, Thomas had a small workshop behind the garage. It was his space, organized in a way that only made sense to him, filled with labeled drawers and carefully arranged tools. There had been an incident once, a minor one at the time. One of his employees had been taking tools, small things easy to miss. For weeks, Thomas couldn't figure out how. Nothing was ever missing all at once. Just one wrench here, one drill bit there, enough to make you question your own memory. Until he installed a small audio recorder. He never told anyone, not even me, until after he had caught the man. I didn't want to accuse someone without knowing he told me back then, sitting at the kitchen table with that quiet certainty of his. Truth matters more than assumptions. At the time, I admired him for it. Now, years later, I understood him. Because I was standing in the same place. Suspicion without proof, and a truth I wasn't ready to confront without certainty. That morning, after David left and the house fell into its usual quiet, I made my way slowly toward the garage. Each step felt deliberate. The walker clicked softly against the floor, the sound echoing slightly in the stillness. For once, I didn't resent it. I focused on the rhythm of it, steady, controlled, grounding. The workshop hadn't changed much since Thomas passed. Dust had settled over the workbench, softening the edges of everything. The air still carried that faint scent of wood and metal, familiar in a way that made my chest ache. I stood there for a moment, letting the memories wash over me. Then I got to work. I started with the drawers. Thomas had labeled everything small white tags with his neat handwriting. Fasteners, electrical, spare parts. It took time to go through them, my fingers moving slowly, carefully as I searched for anything that might resemble what I remembered. For a moment I wondered if I was chasing something that no longer existed. But then in the back of a drawer labeled MISC, I found it. A small rectangular device no larger than my palm. The packaging was still sealed. I held it in my hand, turning it over. Slowly, my heart beating just a little faster. It was exactly what I needed. And somehow, I felt like Thomas had left it there for me to find. Back inside the house, I sat at the kitchen table and carefully opened the package. The instructions were simple enough. Press to record, plug in to retrieve audio, no complicated setup. Thomas had always preferred things that worked without fuss. I tested it once just to be sure, set it on the table, walked a few steps away, spoke a few words. When I played it back, my voice came through clearly. There was no doubt. This would work. The question now was, where to put it? I couldn't leave it out in the open. David was observant more than I had given him credit for. If he saw something unfamiliar, he would ask questions, and I needed him comfortable, unaware. That's when my eyes drifted toward the walker. It was sitting by the doorway exactly where I always left it. For months I had thought of that walker as a symbol of everything I had lost: strength, independence, dignity. But in that moment, I saw it differently. No one paid attention to it. No one questioned it. It was invisible, and invisibility could be powerful. I turned the idea over in my mind, considering the risks. If David found the device, everything would change. He would know I didn't trust him. He would become more careful, more guarded. But if I did nothing, I would remain exactly where he wanted me. Uninformed, unprepared, vulnerable. That wasn't an option anymore. Slowly I reached for the walker and turned it, slightly examining the small fabric pouch attached beneath the seat. It was meant for carrying personal items, keys, a phone, small necessities. I rarely used it, which made it perfect. My hands were steady as I slipped the recorder inside, positioning it carefully so the microphone wasn't obstructed. I adjusted the fabric slightly, making sure nothing looked out of place. Then I stepped back and looked at it. There was nothing to see. No sign of what it now held. Just an ordinary walker. I pressed the button. A small, almost imperceptible light flickered once. Recording. For a moment I stood there staring at it, my thoughts racing. Was I really doing this, spying on my own children? The answer came quietly but firmly. No, I wasn't spying. I was protecting myself. There's a difference. The first day, nothing happened. David didn't come by. Laura didn't visit. The house remained quiet, the recorder capturing nothing but the low hum of appliances and the occasional creak of settling wood. Part of me felt foolish, paranoid. But the other part, the part that had heard that conversation in the hallway, remained patient. The second day was the same. By the third day, I began to wonder if I had missed my chance, if whatever they were planning had already moved beyond whispered conversations and into action. But on the fourth day, everything changed. I had positioned the walker in the living room that afternoon near the hallway leading to the kitchen. Then I went into my bedroom and lay down, leaving the door slightly open. From where I was, I couldn't hear clearly, but that wasn't the point. The microphone could. Time passed slowly, too slowly. I almost convinced myself nothing would happen again, until I heard the front door open. Footsteps, two sets, voices, David and Laura. I kept my eyes closed, my breathing slow, and even forcing myself to remain still. Their voices drifted faintly down the hallway, too soft for me to make out clearly, but I didn't need to hear. Not yet. Not when I had something better. The conversation lasted longer than usual. There were pauses. Tension in the rhythm of their speech. At one point, Laura's voice rose slightly, then dropped again. Then eventually, the front door closed. Silence returned. I waited. 10 minutes, 15. Only when I was certain they were gone did I sit up. My heart was pounding, not with fear this time, but anticipation. Slowly, I made my way into the living room. The walker stood exactly where I had left it. Unchanged, ordinary. But now, it held something. Answers. I reached into the pouch and pulled out the recorder, my fingers tightening around it as if it might disappear. For a moment I hesitated, because once I pressed play, I wouldn't be guessing anymore. I would know, and knowing changes everything. I took a breath, then I walked back to my bedroom, closed the door, and sat down on the bed. The room felt smaller somehow, quieter, as if the walls themselves were waiting. I held the device in my hand, staring at it, feeling the weight of what it contained. Whatever was on that recording, it was the truth my children didn't want me to hear, and I was finally ready to listen. I didn't press play right away. I sat there on the edge of my bed, the small recorder resting in my palm, feeling as though I was holding something fragile and dangerous. My thumb hovered over the button, but I couldn't bring myself to press it just yet, because there's a moment right before the truth reveals itself when you still have a choice to remain uncertain, A choice to believe, even if it's only a little longer, that maybe things aren't as bad as they seem. But once you know, you can never unknow. I closed my eyes for a second and took a slow breath. Then I pressed play. At first there was nothing but static and the faint background hum of the house, the sound of my own breathing from earlier, distant and soft, a chair scraping lightly against the floor, then David's voice. Clear. Closer than I expected. "We don't have much time," he said. My heart tightened immediately. There was a pause, followed by Laura's voice, quieter, unsteady. "I know, but this still doesn't feel right." I gripped the recorder harder. David exhaled sharply, the sound edged with irritation. "Feeling right doesn't matter anymore, Laura. We're past that." Another pause. Then Laura again, her voice trembling slightly. She's not incapable, David. You know that." "She doesn't have to be completely incapable," he replied. "Just enough." The words hit me like a physical blow. Just enough. Enough to what? To take control? To erase me. I felt my chest tighten, my breathing becoming shallow as I forced myself to keep listening. "What about the evaluation?" Laura asked. "That's already in motion," David said. "I spoke to the doctor last week. He understands the situation. You told him she's confused. I told him what he needed to hear." The room seemed to tilt slightly. I pressed my free hand against the mattress to steady myself. "You can't just decide that for her," Laura whispered. She's vulnerable," David cut in. "And if we don't act now, everything Dad left behind is going to fall apart." There it was again. Thomas. Always Thomas. Always the justification. Laura's voice broke slightly when she spoke next. "This isn't what he wanted." Silence followed. Heavy, thick. Then David spoke again, slower this time, more controlled. "Dad isn't here anymore, Laura," he said. "And he didn't leave things in a way that helps us. He left a mess. A mess." I felt something twist deep in my chest. Thomas had spent his entire life building security for this family. Every decision he made was careful, intentional. And now, his own son was reducing it to a problem to fix. "That's not true," Laura said quietly. "You know that's not true. Then explain the missing documents," David shot back. "Explain the accounts that don't add up. Explain why we're scrambling right now, instead of moving forward." There was a tremor in Laura's voice when she responded. "Because you went through his office before anyone else could." My breath caught. The air in the room felt suddenly too thin. "What does that have to do with anything?" David replied quickly. "You know what it has to do with," Laura said. "You took things, David. You didn't tell anyone what you took." "That's not—" "Don't," she said, her voice sharper now. "Just don't lie to me." There was a long silence, long enough that I thought the recording had stopped. Then David spoke again, quieter this time. "I did what I had to do." My stomach dropped. "To protect us," he added. "Or to protect yourself?" Laura asked. Another silence. This one felt different, heavier, more dangerous. When David spoke again, his voice had lost whatever softness it had before. "Listen to me carefully," he said. "If Mom finds out what happened to Dad's documents, everything falls apart. Not just for me, for all of us." There it was. The line that had echoed in my mind since I first overheard it, but hearing it clearly now, it felt worse, because now I understood. This wasn't just about taking control of my life. This was about hiding something connected to Thomas. Laura's voice came back barely above a whisper. "This is wrong." "What's wrong?" David said coldly, "is letting everything Dad built disappear, because we were too afraid to act." "You're not acting," she said. "You're forcing this." "I'm fixing it," he snapped. "And once Mom signs the papers, everything gets easier." My hands began to shake. Papers. There it was again. "What if she doesn't sign?" Laura asked. There was a slight shift in the background. Maybe David moving pacing. Then he answered. "Then we move forward anyway." "How?" A pause. And then the words that made my blood run cold. "We established that she can't make decisions for herself." The room seemed to close in around me. "She's not incompetent," Laura said quickly. "You can't just—" "It doesn't take much," David interrupted. "A few evaluations, some documented concerns. People see what they're told to see." I felt something inside me crack open. Not just fear, something deeper, betrayal. "She's our mother." Laura said, her voice breaking now. "You're talking about her like she's a problem to solve." "She is a problem right now," David replied flatly. And if we don't handle this properly, we're all going to pay for it." Silence fell again, and this time Laura didn't argue. When she spoke again, her voice was small. What about what you did?" Another pause. Long, heavy, dangerous. "What I did," David said slowly, "was necessary. You don't even sound like yourself anymore," she whispered. "That's because I'm the only one thinking clearly," he said. "You're letting emotion get in the way, and you're not," she asked. "No," he replied. "I'm doing what needs to be done." The conversation ended not long after that. A chair scraped, footsteps, the sound of the front door opening, then closing, and then nothing. Just the faint hum of the recorder as the house returned to silence. I sat there on my bed, staring at the device in my hand, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might break through my chest. I didn't move. I couldn't, because everything I had feared was real. This wasn't misunderstanding. This wasn't overprotection. This was a plan, a calculated, deliberate plan to take control of my life and to hide something connected to my husband. And the worst part, it wasn't just David. Laura knew. Maybe not everything, maybe not from the beginning, but she knew enough to be afraid, enough to question him, enough to stay silent. I lowered the recorder slowly, my fingers numb. For a long time, I just sat there in the quiet, trying to process what I had heard, trying to understand how the children I raised had become strangers in my own home. And then slowly something else began to rise inside me. Not panic, not despair, something steadier, stronger. If they thought I was too weak to understand what was happening, too fragile to fight back, then they had made a mistake, a very serious mistake, because now I knew. And knowing meant one thing. I wasn't going to wait for them to decide my future. I was going to take it back. I didn't confront them the next day, or the day after that. Every instinct in me wanted to march straight into the kitchen, place the recorder on the table, and demand an explanation, force David to look me in the eye and tell me why he thought he had the right to dismantle my life, piece by piece. But instinct, I reminded myself, was not strategy. And for the first time in a long while, I needed strategy. Because whatever David was doing, he wasn't acting impulsively. There were documents involved. Professionals, timelines, words like evaluation and authority weren't casual. They were deliberate. That meant one thing. If I acted too soon, I could lose. So instead of confronting him, I did something far more difficult. I stayed quiet. But I stopped being passive. The next morning, I called someone I hadn't spoken to in months. "Marlene," I said when she picked up, "Bella." Her voice warmed immediately. "Well, look at you calling before noon. Is everything all right?" I smiled faintly, even though she couldn't see it. "I was hoping you might have some time this week. I could use your help with something." There was a brief pause, not suspicious, but attentive. "What kind of help?" she asked. "Paperwork," I said carefully. "Just organizing things. After Thomas." That was enough. Marlene had been a paralegal for over 30 years. She understood what paperwork could mean, especially when someone mentioned it in that tone. "I'll come by this afternoon," she said without hesitation. And just like that, I wasn't alone anymore. When she arrived, she greeted me the same way she always had, no pity, no exaggerated concern. Just a steady, grounded presence that reminded me of who I was before everything became uncertain. We sat at the dining table and I brought out what I had: folders, envelopes, Thomas's old estate binder, the one I had barely touched since his passing. "I thought it was time I actually looked through all of this," I said. It wasn't a lie, just not the full truth. Marlene nodded and began sorting through the documents with practiced efficiency, but it didn't take long before her movements slowed, then stopped. "Bella," she said quietly, "where are the rest of these pages?" I felt my chest tighten slightly. "What do you mean?" She flipped through the binder again, more carefully this time. "This section there should be attachments, addendums supporting documents. Something's missing." A cold, familiar feeling settled over me. Missing. Just like the bank letter. "I haven't removed anything," I said slowly. Marlene looked up at me, her expression serious now. "I didn't think you did." Silence stretched between us. I could feel the weight of the moment pressing down the truth, hovering just beneath the surface. This was the point where I had to decide how much to say. And this time, I chose not to hold back. "I think someone else did," I said. Marlene didn't react with shock. She didn't gasp or question me. She simply leaned back in her chair, folded her hands, and said, "Then you need to tell me everything." So I did. Not all at once, not in a rush, but piece by piece I laid it out. The missing mail, the strange behavior, the conversations that stopped when I entered the room, and finally, the recording. I didn't play it for her right away. I just described what I had heard. The words, the tone, the plan. Marlene listened without interrupting, her expression growing more focused with every detail. When I finished, the room felt quieter than before. "He's trying to establish control," she said finally. "I know." And the evaluation he mentioned, she continued. "That's likely part of a process to question your cognitive ability. If he gets a professional to document concerns, it can be used to support a guardianship request." The word landed heavily. Guardianship. I had heard it before in passing, but never in a way that felt connected to me. What would that mean, I asked. "It means," Marlene said carefully, "that someone else could be legally authorized to make decisions on your behalf. Financial, medical, everything. Everything. My home, my accounts, my autonomy. And if I refuse," I asked. If he has enough documentation, she replied, he could still petition for it. A chill ran through me. Everything I had heard on that recording suddenly felt more real, more immediate. This wasn't just a conversation, it was already in motion. "What about the missing documents?" I asked. Marlene tapped the binder lightly. If there were protections in place, additional instructions from Thomas, for example, and those documents are gone. She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Then someone may have removed them for a reason. David." The name didn't need to be spoken. We both knew. Marlene closed the binder slowly and looked at me. "You need to be very careful now, Bella," she said. "If he's already started this process, you can't tip him off too early. Not until you understand exactly what he's done." "I don't plan to," I said quietly. And for the first time since this began, I meant it. We spent the next hour going through everything else. Bank statements, insurance forms, medical paperwork. That's when we found it. A document I didn't recognize. It was tucked between two unrelated pages, almost as if it had been placed there quickly without care. Marlene pulled it out and frowned. "This isn't something you would have signed recently, is it?" I leaned forward, my eyes scanning the page. It was a request form for a cognitive evaluation. My name was printed clearly at the top. My stomach dropped. "I didn't request this," I said. "I didn't think you did," Marlene replied. There were notes attached, brief clinical observations suggesting concerns about memory decision-making, vulnerability. I felt a surge of anger rise in my chest. "This isn't true," I said, my voice sharper now. "I know," Marlene said calmly, "but that's not the point." "Then what is the point?" she said, "is that someone is building a case." The room felt smaller suddenly, more confined. "How far along is this?" I asked. She scanned the document again, far enough that it's no longer just an idea. That was when I understood something important. This wasn't something David was planning to do. This was something he had already started, and I was behind, not just emotionally, legally, strategically, dangerously behind. I leaned back in my chair, my mind racing. But beneath the fear, something else was forming. Focus. "If I want to stop this," I said slowly, "what do I need?" Marlene met my gaze. "Information," she said, "proof, and the right legal support." I thought of the recording, of David's voice, of Laura's fear. "I can get that," I said. She nodded once. "Then don't rush," she added. "Let him think he's in control. That's when people make mistakes." I exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of everything settling into place. This wasn't just about defending myself anymore. It was about understanding the full extent of what had been done and why. Because one thing was becoming clearer with every step. David wasn't acting alone, not completely, and Laura was still in the middle of it. Not leading, not innocent, but not beyond reach either. That mattered, because it meant there was still a chance to uncover the truth from the inside. I closed the binder gently, my hands steady now. For the first time since I pressed play on that recording, I didn't feel powerless. I felt prepared, and I knew exactly what I needed to do next. I wasn't going to confront them. Not yet. I was going to watch, to listen, to gather everything they thought I was too weak to understand. Because if David believed I was slipping, Then I was going to let him believe it, right up until the moment he realized I wasn't the one losing control. He was. That night after Marlene left, I didn't turn on the television. I didn't make tea. I didn't distract myself with anything that might soften what I now understood. Instead, I sat alone at the dining table with Thomas's old estate binder in front of me, my fingers resting lightly on the worn leather cover. For 18 months, I had avoided opening it. Not because I didn't care, but because it felt like opening it would mean accepting that he was truly gone. But now it meant something else. It meant answers, and possibly protection. I opened it slowly. The first few sections were familiar property deeds, insurance policies, retirement accounts. Everything Thomas had always kept in perfect order. Even now I could see his method in the way the pages were arranged labeled cross-referenced. But Marlene had been right. There were gaps. Places where something had been removed not carelessly but deliberately. I turned each page carefully, my eyes scanning not just for what was there, but for what wasn't. And then I noticed something, a faint indentation near the bottom edge of one section just before the divider labeled Supplemental Documents. The page that should have followed was gone, but the indentation remained like a shadow of what used to be there. I ran my fingers lightly across the paper, feeling the slight depression. Something had been clipped there. Removed. I leaned back in my chair, my mind racing. Thomas wasn't the kind of man who left things incomplete. If something had been placed in that section, it mattered, which meant whoever removed it knew exactly what they were taking. David. The name settled heavily in my chest, but I needed more than instinct. I needed proof. That's when I remembered something else about Thomas. He never trusted a single copy, ever. Important things deserve backups, he used to say. At the time, I thought it was just one of his habits. Now I realized it might be the key. The next morning, I went back to the workshop. This time, I wasn't looking for tools. I was looking for patterns. Thomas had always organized things in layers visible storage for everyday use and hidden storage for what truly mattered. If there had been an addendum, something important enough to remove from the main binder, then there might be another copy somewhere. The workshop was quiet, the air still carrying that familiar scent of wood and oil. I moved slowly, methodically opening drawers, checking behind panels, examining places I had never thought to look before. Minutes passed, then an hour. For a moment I wondered if I was chasing something that didn't exist anymore. Until I reached the workbench. There was a toolbox there, one Thomas rarely used toward the end. It was heavier than the others, its surface worn but intact. I pulled it toward me carefully and opened it. Inside, everything looked normal. Wrenches, screwdrivers, a few loose bolts, but something felt off. The bottom looked thicker than it should have. I frowned slightly, pressing my fingers against the base. It didn't move, but it didn't feel solid either. I turned the box, slightly examining the edges more closely, and then I saw it. A small, almost invisible seam running along the inner frame. My heart began to beat faster. Carefully, I pressed against one corner. Nothing, then the other. Still nothing. I paused, thinking. Thomas had always designed things with intention. If there was a hidden compartment, there would be a specific way to open it. Not random, precise. I took a breath and pressed both corners at once. A soft click. So faint I almost didn't hear it, but I felt it. The base shifted slightly. My hands trembled, not from weakness, but from anticipation as I lifted the false bottom. And there it was, a sealed envelope, yellowed slightly at the edges, but intact. My name was written on the front in Thomas's handwriting. Bella, just that, nothing more. For a moment I couldn't move. Seeing his handwriting again, it hit me harder than I expected. I traced the letters lightly with my finger, my vision blurring for just a second before I steadied myself. Then slowly, I opened it. Inside were several documents. The first was a notarized addendum. I recognized the format, immediately legal language, precise wording, signatures, dates. But it was the content that made my breath catch. It stated clearly, if any attempt was made to establish control over my assets through coercion, manipulation, or questionable claims of incapacity, all primary assets, including the house, would be transferred into a protected trust. A trust that required independent review before any decisions could be made. No single individual could take control. not even a family member. I sat down slowly on the stool beside the workbench, my hands gripping the paper tightly. Thomas had known. He had anticipated something like this. But why? What had he seen? I continued reading. There was more. Another document. A note written by hand this time. Not formal, personal. Bella. If you are reading this, it means something didn't feel right. Trust that feeling. There are things I discovered in the months before I got sick, things I was still trying to understand. I didn't want to accuse anyone without certainty, but I also couldn't ignore what I found. I've left copies of everything with Evelyn Carter. If something happens, she will know what to do. And Bella, don't let anyone rush you into decisions you don't fully understand. You are stronger than they think. Always have been, Thomas. The words blurred for a moment as tears filled my eyes, not just from grief, but from something deeper. Recognition. He had seen it coming, maybe not exactly like this, but enough to prepare, enough to protect me, even after he was gone. I pressed the note gently against my chest, closing my eyes for a brief moment. I hear you, I whispered. Then I opened my eyes again. Because this wasn't just about understanding anymore. It was about action. I looked back at the addendum, reading it again more carefully this time. Every clause, every condition, every protection. This wasn't just a precaution, it was a safeguard, a barrier against exactly what David was trying to do, which meant one thing. If this document had been in the main binder, David would have seen it, and if he had seen it, he would have known it could stop him. My grip tightened on the paper. That's why it was missing. That's why he went through Thomas's office first. That's why he removed documents before anyone else could, because this would have destroyed his entire plan. A cold clarity settled over me. Everything was starting to connect. The missing pages, the pressure to sign quickly, the urgency, the evaluation. It wasn't just about control. It was about beating something. Or rather, someone. Thomas. Even in death, he had built something David couldn't easily break. And now, I had it. Proof. Protection, and something else, too. Leverage. I carefully placed the documents back into the envelope, sealing it again with steady hands. Then I stood up, holding it firmly. For the first time since this began, I didn't feel like I was catching up. I felt like I just stepped ahead. But I also knew something important. This wasn't the end of the truth. It was just the beginning. Because Thomas had said it himself. There were things he was still trying to understand, which meant there was more. And if David had gone this far to hide it, then whatever he was protecting was even worse than I imagined. I turned toward the door, the envelope secure in my hand, my mind already moving to the next step. I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was uncovering, piece by piece. And now, for the first time, I had something David didn't expect. Time. I didn't tell Laura right away. Even after everything I had uncovered in Thomas's workshop, even after holding that envelope in my hands and reading his words over and over again, I knew I couldn't rush the next step. Because Laura wasn't David. That much was clear. But she also wasn't innocent. And the difference between those two things mattered more than ever, Seal. For 2 days I waited. I watched. I listened. David continued as if nothing had changed, still arriving with that same controlled confidence, still speaking in that calm, persuasive tone, still treating my life like something that needed to be managed. But now I saw it differently. Every word he chose, every pause, every time he redirected a conversation away from specifics. It wasn't concern, it was calculation. Laura, on the other hand, was slipping. Not dramatically, not in ways anyone else might notice, but I noticed. Because I was looking for it now. She avoided eye contact more often. She lingered less. Her voice carried a tension that hadn't been there before, as if she were constantly measuring what she could say and what she couldn't. And then on the third morning, she came by alone. That in itself was unusual. Laura rarely visited without at least mentioning it to David first. There was always a kind of invisible coordination between them, subtle but present. But that day, she didn't call ahead. She just showed up. I was in the kitchen when I heard the door open. "Mom," she called softly. "I'm here," I replied. She stepped into the room a moment later, and the first thing I noticed was her face. Pale, tired, like she hadn't slept. "Hi," she said, forcing a small smile. "Hi, sweetheart." There was an awkward pause, something unfamiliar between us. Then she moved toward the counter, picking up a dish towel that didn't need to be picked up. "Do you need anything?" she asked. "Groceries? I can stop by the store later?" "I'm all right," I said gently. Another pause. Longer this time. I watched her carefully, saying nothing, waiting. Because sometimes silence is what makes the truth come forward. She folded the towel once, then again. Then she stopped. "Mom," she began. Her voice faltered. I didn't interrupt. She exhaled shakily. "I've been meaning to talk to you about something." There it was. The opening. I kept my expression calm, steady. "Okay," I said. "I'm listening." She hesitated again, her fingers tightening slightly around the fabric in her hands. "It's just, things have been complicated lately," she said. "That's one way to put it," I replied quietly. Her eyes flicked up to mine just for a second, then away again. "I don't want you to think that I'm against you," she said quickly. "Because I'm not. I would never, Laura." My voice was soft, but it stopped her. She looked at me then. Really looked at me. And I saw it clearly. Fear. Not of me. Of something else. "I know," I said. 2 simple words. But they landed between us like something heavy. Her breath caught. "What do you mean?" she asked. I held her gaze. "I know more than you think I do." For a moment she didn't move, didn't blink, then her entire expression shifted. The tension that had been building inside her broke. "Oh God," she whispered. The towel slipped from her hands and fell to the floor, forgotten. "How much do you know?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Enough," I said. And that was all it took. She sank into the nearest chair, her hands covering her face as a quiet sob escaped her. "I didn't want this," she said through her fingers. "I didn't want any of this." I moved slowly, deliberately, and sat down across from her. "I believe you," I said, and I did. Because whatever Laura had done, it wasn't driven by cold calculation. It was driven by something else. Fear, pressure, weakness. None of those excused her actions. But they explained them. She lowered her hands slowly, her eyes red, her expression raw. "He told me it was temporary," she said, "that we just needed to stabilize things." Who I asked, though I already knew. "David," she whispered. "Of course." "What kind of things?" I asked gently. She swallowed hard. "Money," she said. "Debt." My chest tightened slightly. "What kind of debt?" She hesitated again, but only for a moment this time. Then the words came out in a rush. "He invested in a construction project last year. A big one. He said it was a sure thing. He borrowed money more than he should have, and when it failed..." Her voice cracked. Everything collapsed. I stayed quiet, letting her continue. "He didn't tell anyone at first," she said. "Not even me. I only found out a few months before Dad..." She stopped, her breath catching. "Before Thomas died, I finished softly." She nodded. "He was already trying to fix it," she said. "Moving money around, making deals. I don't think Dad knew everything, but he knew enough. That matched what I had read, what I had suspected, what happened after I asked." Laura's expression darkened. "After Dad died, David went through his office," she said, "right away. Before we even finished making arrangements." My stomach tightened. "What did he take?" "I don't know exactly," she said quickly. "I swear, Mom, I don't. But I know he took something, documents, files. He said he was organizing things, but..." She shook her head. "He wouldn't let me see everything, and you didn't question that I did," she said, her voice rising slightly, "but he kept saying it was complicated, that he was protecting us, that if we didn't act fast, everything could fall apart. And you believed him." Her eyes filled with tears again. "I wanted to," she said. "That was the truth of it. Not that she was convinced, but that she chose to believe, because it was easier, safer." "What about the evaluation?" I asked. She flinched slightly. "I didn't know how far he'd go," she said. "At first it was just paperwork, just preparing, but then he started talking about doctors, about assessments, about how it wouldn't take much to show that you needed help." Her voice broke again. "I told him it was wrong," she said. "I told him this wasn't what Dad would have wanted." "I know," I said quietly. Her head snapped up. You heard that?" I held her gaze. "Yes, The realization hit her all at once. The recording, she whispered. I didn't confirm it. I didn't need to. She already understood. A long silence stretched between us. Then she spoke again, her voice barely audible. If you find out everything he did, she said, it's over. The same words, the same fear. I leaned forward slightly. Laura, I said gently, what am I going to find? She shook her head slowly. I don't know everything she said, but I know enough to be afraid. Of what? She hesitated. Then finally, that it's worse than you think. The words settled heavily in the room, and for a moment neither of us spoke, because we both understood what that meant. This wasn't just about money. It wasn't just about control. There was something deeper, something David didn't want uncovered, and now I was closer to it than ever. I reached across the table slowly and placed my hand over hers. She didn't pull away. I'm not going to let this destroy us, I said softly. Her fingers tightened slightly under mine, but I am going to find the truth. She closed her eyes for a moment, then nodded, and in that moment, I knew something had shifted. Laura wasn't standing with David anymore, but she wasn't fully free either, not yet, and that meant one thing. The truth was still ahead of us, waiting. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about what Laura had said. I don't know everything, but I know enough to be afraid. The words stayed with me long after she left, echoing in the quiet corners of the house, like a warning I couldn't ignore. Because fear, real fear, doesn't come from nothing. It comes from knowing just enough of the truth to understand its weight, without fully seeing its shape. And now, I needed that shape. The next morning, I called the name Thomas had written in his note. Evelyn Carter. The line rang twice before a calm, professional voice answered. Carter and Associates. This is Evelyn. For a moment I hesitated, not because I doubted what I was doing, but because I understood that this call would move everything forward. There would be no more waiting after this. My name is Bella Whitmore, I said. My husband was Thomas Whitmore. There was a brief pause. Then her tone shifted subtly, but unmistakably. Yes, Mrs. Whitmore, she said. I was wondering when you might reach out. My grip tightened slightly on the phone. You were? I asked. Yes, she replied. Your husband made it very clear that if anything felt unusual, you should contact me directly. Unusual. That was one way to describe it. I think we should meet, I said. I agree. She replied without hesitation. Can you come in today? I can. Good. I'll clear my schedule. Her office was exactly what I expected. Orderly, quiet, efficient, the kind of place where nothing existed without purpose. Marlene insisted on coming with me, and I was grateful for it. Not because I couldn't handle the conversation, but because I wanted someone beside me who understood the language we were about to speak. Legal language, precise, careful, unforgiving. Evelyn greeted us at the door, her expression composed but attentive. She was younger than I expected, perhaps in her late 40s, but there was something in her eyes that told me she missed very little. Mrs. Whitmore, she said, extending her hand. It's good to finally meet you. Bella, I said. She nodded. Bella. We sat down in her office, and for a moment no one spoke. Then Evelyn leaned forward slightly. Tell me what's happening. So I did. Not everything at once, but enough. The recordings, the missing documents, the evaluation request, Laura's confession. I watched her carefully as I spoke, noting the small shifts in her expression, nothing dramatic, but enough to tell me she was connecting pieces. When I finished, she was silent for a moment. Then she opened a folder on her desk. I was hoping I wouldn't need this yet, she said. My heart skipped slightly. Need what? She turned the folder toward me. Inside were documents, copies, neatly organized, carefully labeled. My breath caught. These are duplicates of materials your husband provided to me before his death, she said, including financial summaries, correspondence, and records he was still investigating. I leaned forward, my eyes scanning the pages. Numbers. Transactions. Account transfers. At first it didn't fully make sense, but then Evelyn pointed to a specific section. Here, she said. I followed her finger. A series of withdrawals, large ones, spread over several months, all tied to a business account connected to a family property investment. That account was managed jointly, she continued. But these withdrawals were not authorized by your husband. A cold weight settled in my chest. Who made them, I asked. Evelyn met my eyes. David. The word landed with a quiet finality. Even though I had suspected it, even though Laura had hinted at it, hearing it confirmed like this was different, more solid, more real. My son. Not just manipulating things after Thomas died, but before. How long did Thomas know, I asked? Not long, Evelyn said. He discovered irregularities a few months before his passing. He was still gathering evidence when we last spoke. Why didn't he confront David? He intended to, she replied, but carefully. He didn't want to create a public situation without fully understanding the scope of the issue. That sounded like Thomas. Always precise, always measured. What was he planning to do, I asked. Evelyn reached for another document. He was preparing to remove David as executor of the estate, she said, and to implement additional safeguards. My hands tightened slightly. But he didn't finish, I said. No, she replied gently. He passed before those changes could be finalized. The room felt heavier, because now everything made sense. David hadn't just taken advantage of the situation after Thomas died. He had been exposed, or at least close to it. And instead of facing the consequences, he had moved faster, covering his tracks, removing documents, controlling the narrative. He knew I said quietly. Evelyn nodded. He likely suspected your husband was close to uncovering everything, she said, which would explain why he acted so quickly after the funeral. My stomach turned. I thought of Laura's words. He went through his office before anyone else could. Now I understood why. He wasn't just organizing things, I said. No, Evelyn replied. He was protecting himself. Silence settled over the room, heavy, unavoidable. Then another thought surfaced, one I hadn't allowed myself to fully consider until now. What about Thomas's death, I asked. The words came out slowly, carefully. Evelyn's expression shifted slightly, not alarmed, but thoughtful. What do you mean, I mean? I hesitated, choosing my words. Is there any reason to believe that what David did went beyond financial misconduct? The question hung in the air between us, dangerous, necessary. Evelyn didn't answer immediately. She closed the folder slowly, her fingers resting on the edge. There is no evidence, she said carefully, to suggest that your husband's death was anything other than natural. I exhaled softly. A part of me deep down had feared something worse, but that didn't make this any easier, because what David had done was already enough. He betrayed him, I said. Evelyn nodded once. Yes. Not softened, not explained away, just the truth. And now she added, he appears to be attempting to consolidate control before anyone can challenge him. By declaring me incapable, I said. Exactly. I leaned back in my chair, my mind racing. Everything was clearer now. The debt, the withdrawals, the missing documents, the pressure, the urgency. It wasn't random, it was a chain. And every link led back to the same place. David. What do I do? I asked. Evelyn didn't hesitate. We move carefully, she said. You do not confront him yet. You do not sign anything. And you continue gathering evidence. I thought of the recorder, of his voice, of the things he had already admitted. I can do that, I said. I know you can, she replied. Then she leaned forward slightly, her tone sharpening just a fraction. But Bella, you need to understand something. I met her gaze. This is no longer just a family matter, she said. This is legal. And if handled properly, you can protect yourself and hold him accountable. Accountable. The words settled heavily. Because this wasn't just about stopping him anymore. It was about consequences. For what he had done to his father, to me, to our family. I nodded slowly. I understand. And for the first time since this began, I truly did. This wasn't confusion. It wasn't misunderstanding. It was betrayal. Deep. Deliberate, and already in motion long before I realized it. But now, I was no longer behind. I had the truth, I had support, and most importantly, I had time to act. And David, he still believed I didn't know, which meant he was about to make a mistake. By the time I returned home from Evelyn's office, something inside me had settled. Not the fear. That was still there, quiet, steady, like a shadow that refused to leave, but something stronger had taken its place. Control. For weeks I had been reacting, trying to understand, trying to keep up, trying to make sense of pieces that didn't fit together. Now, for the first time, I was ahead. and I intended to stay that way. Marlene stayed with me for a while after we got back, helping me organize what we had gathered so far. We didn't speak much, there was no need. Everything that needed to be said had already been said. Before she left, she placed her hand gently over mine. Remember, she said he only has power if you give it to him. I nodded. I won't, and I meant it. That evening, I made a decision that would have terrified me just days earlier. I called David. He answered on the second ring. "Hey, Mom," he said, his voice warm, familiar, the same voice he had used my entire life. But now, I heard it differently. "Hi, sweetheart," I replied, matching his tone. "Do you have a minute?" "Of course. What's going on?" I let a small pause hang in the air, just enough to sound uncertain. "I've been thinking about what you said," I began slowly, "about making things easier, getting everything organized." There was a subtle shift in his voice. Interest. "That's good," he said. "I've been trying to help you with that." "I know," I said softly. "And I think maybe you're right." Silence. Just for a second, but it was enough, because I could almost hear his thoughts racing. "You do?" he asked. "I'm just tired, David," I said, letting a slight tremor enter my voice. "Keeping track of everything? It's getting harder." The lie felt strange in my mouth, but necessary. "Well," he said carefully, "that's exactly why I've been suggesting we put some things in place, just to make sure everything is handled properly." "I understand that now," I replied. "I don't want to make things difficult." Another pause. Then gently, "So, if there are papers that need to be signed, maybe we should go ahead and do that." There it was, the opening. On his side, I heard a quiet exhale almost too soft to notice. But I noticed. "Yeah," he said, his tone steady but carrying something beneath it. Relief, maybe. Or satisfaction. That would be a good idea. "When would you like to come by?" I asked. "How about tomorrow?" he said quickly. "I can bring everything over, walk you through it." "All right," I said. "Tomorrow works." We ended the call shortly after that. And as I set the phone down, I sat there for a moment in silence. Not shaken, not uncertain, but focused. Because now, the trap was set. The next morning I prepared carefully. Not outwardly, nothing obvious, but every detail mattered. I chose my clothes deliberately, something soft, comfortable, slightly worn, the kind of outfit that suggested someone who wasn't paying much attention to appearances. I moved a little slower than usual, paused more often, let my hands linger just a second too long on objects as if I were unsure. It wasn't difficult. People see what they expect to see. And David expected weakness. I placed the walker in its usual position, but before I did, I slipped the recorder back into the pouch. Carefully, precisely. This time it wasn't about discovering a secret. It was about capturing proof. I pressed the button, recording. Then I waited. David arrived right on time. Of course he did. He stepped into the house with his usual confidence, carrying a leather folder under his arm. "Hey, Mom," he said, smiling. "Hi," I replied, returning the smile just a little softer than usual. "How are you feeling today?" he asked. "Oh, a bit tired," I said, "but all right." He nodded his eyes, scanning me quickly, assessing, measuring. Good. Let him. We moved into the dining room and he set the folder down on the table. "I brought everything we talked about," he said. "Just some standard documents, nothing complicated." "Okay," I said, lowering myself slowly into the chair. He sat across from me, opening the folder with practiced ease. "There are just a few things to go over," he continued. "This one is a general authorization, just allows me to help manage certain accounts if needed." He slid the paper toward me. I looked at it, but not too closely. "Not yet." "And this?" I asked, gesturing to another document. "That's for medical coordination," he said smoothly. "Just in case anything comes up. Just in case." I nodded slowly, letting a small crease form between my brows. "It's a lot," I murmured. "I know," he said quickly, "but I'll walk you through everything. You don't have to worry." There it was again. That tone. Reassuring. Confident. Controlling. I let my gaze drift over the pages as if I were trying to follow but struggling. "Maybe you can just tell me where to sign," I said quietly. For a moment, just a moment, something flickered in his eyes. Victory. It was subtle, but it was there. "Of course," he said, picking up a pen. "I'll guide you through it." Guide, such a gentle word. I reached for the pen, slowly letting my hand tremble just slightly. Then I stopped. Actually, I said. He looked up. What is it? I think I need a minute, I said, pressing my hand lightly to my temple. It's just a lot to take in. Concern crossed his face. Convincing. Well, we don't have to rush, he said. But it would be good to get this done soon. Soon. Always soon. I understand, I said. Maybe after lunch, that's fine, he replied. He leaned back slightly, relaxing. Too soon, too easily, because he thought he had already won. I'll make something, I said, pushing myself up slowly with the walker. Don't worry about that, he said. I can. No, I interrupted gently. I'd like to. He hesitated, then nodded. All right. I moved into the kitchen, the walker gliding softly across the floor. Behind me, I could hear him shifting in his chair, waiting, comfortable, unaware. But I didn't go far. I stayed just out of sight, just close enough. Because this was the moment I had been preparing for. And sure enough, it didn't take long. His phone buzzed, a chair creaked, and then his voice. Lower now, unfiltered. It's happening, he said quietly. A pause. No, she's ready. She didn't even question it. Another pause. I told you. She's slipping. My grip tightened on the walker handle. She'll sign today, he continued. And once that's done, everything else moves forward. Silence. Then more quietly, no. She has no idea. I felt something cold settle in my chest. Because he believed it. Completely. And that belief was exactly what I needed. I stayed where I was, my breathing steady, my expression calm. Because now it wasn't just suspicion anymore. It wasn't just fear. It was evidence. Clear. Undeniable. And soon, it would be enough. I didn't move right away. I stayed exactly where I was in the kitchen, my hand resting lightly on the walker, my breathing slow and controlled. On the surface, everything looked calm. But inside, every word David had just spoken was echoing with a clarity that left no room for doubt. She didn't even question it. She's slipping. She'll sign today. He believed every part of it, and that belief was about to become his biggest mistake. I waited another minute before stepping back into the dining room, careful to let my expression settle into something soft, slightly uncertain. Not afraid, not alert, just tired. David looked up as I entered his phone, already back in his pocket. His posture relaxed again. Everything okay? He asked. Yes, I said gently. Just needed a moment. Of course, he replied. Take your time, take your time. It almost made me smile. Because for the first time was mine. I moved slowly back to my seat, lowering myself carefully, letting the walker rest beside me. The recorder inside it continued capturing everything, every word, every shift in tone, every truth he didn't realize he was giving away. So, he said, picking up the pen again, where were we? I looked down at the papers in front of me, my eyes scanning them more carefully now. Not as someone confused, but as someone gathering evidence. This one, I said, tapping lightly on the page he had mentioned earlier. You said it allows you to help manage my accounts. That's right, he said smoothly, just in case you need assistance. Assistance, I repeated quietly. It's standard, he added quickly. Nothing unusual. I nodded slowly, then shifted my attention to another document. And this one. About the evaluation. He hesitated, just for a fraction of a second, but I saw it. That's just a precaution, he said. Routine. Sometimes doctors like to have a baseline assessment. A baseline, I echoed. Yes, he said, leaning forward slightly. It's nothing to worry about. I looked up at him then. Really looked. At the confidence in his expression. At the calm certainty. At the way he believed he was in control. And for a moment, I felt something I hadn't expected. Sadness. Because this was my son. The boy I had raised. The man I had trusted. And now, a stranger sitting across from me explaining how to quietly take my life away. I see, I said softly. He relaxed again, mistaking my tone for acceptance. Exactly, he said. It's just about making things easier for both of us. For both of us. I lowered my gaze again, letting the silence stretch just long enough. Then I asked very gently, what happens if I don't sign? The question hung in the air between us, and for the first time, he didn't answer immediately. It was subtle, but it was there. The calculation, the adjustment. Well, he said finally it would just make things more complicated. We'd have to go through other channels. More time, more stress. For you. For me, I repeated. Yes, he said quickly. That's what I'm trying to avoid. I nodded slowly. But inside, everything sharpened, because I knew what other channels meant. I had heard it. We established that she can't make decisions for herself. I let out a small breath as if the thought itself was tiring. "I don't want things to be complicated," I said. "You don't have to worry about that," he replied. "I'll take care of everything." Of course he would. That was the plan. I picked up the pen again, letting my hand hover over the paper. Then I stopped. Again. I said, frowning slightly. "I wish your father were here." The words shifted something in the room. David's expression tightened just briefly, then smoothed over. "Yeah," he said, "me too." But there was no warmth in it, no grief, just a response. "Do you think he would have wanted this?" I asked quietly. Another pause, longer this time. "Mom," he said, his tone firmer now. "This isn't about what he wanted. It's about what needs to happen now." There it was, clear, unfiltered. I looked down at the paper again, my grip on the pen loosening slightly. What if there were things I didn't know I asked? He frowned. "What do you mean? What if Dad had plans?" "Things he didn't finish," I continued. His eyes narrowed just slightly. "I'm sure everything important is already accounted for," he said. "Are you?" I asked. The question landed harder than the others. I could see it in the way his posture shifted, in the way his attention sharpened. "Why are you asking that?" he said. There it was, the first crack. I let a small, uncertain smile touch my lips. "I don't know," I said, just thinking out loud. He watched me for a moment longer, studying, measuring. Then slowly he leaned back again. "You don't need to worry about things like that," he said. "That's what I'm here for. Of course. Always him." I nodded again, lowering my gaze. But inside, everything was already decided. Because I had what I needed. His words, his tone, his intention, captured, preserved, proof. I placed the pen down gently on the table. "I think I need a little more time," I said softly. His expression changed instantly. Not anger, not yet, but something sharper. Controlled frustration. "We talked about this," he said. "Delaying doesn't help." "I know," I replied, "but I want to be sure." "You can trust me," he said. There it was again, that word, trust. I looked up at him, and for the first time, I didn't pretend. Not fully. "I used to," I said quietly. The silence that followed was different, heavier, more dangerous. "What's that supposed to mean?" he asked. I held his gaze, long enough for him to feel it. Then I softened my expression again, letting the moment pass. "I'm just tired," I said. "That's all." He didn't respond right away, but I could see it. The shift. Something inside him had changed. Not suspicion, not fully, but awareness. And that meant something important. The window was closing, which was fine, because I already had what I came for. I pushed my chair back slowly, using the walker to steady myself. "I think I'll rest for a bit," I said. "Mom," he started. "Later," I said gently. "We'll talk later." I didn't wait for him to respond. I simply turned and walked toward my bedroom, my steps slow, measured. Behind me, I could feel his eyes, watching, thinking, trying to understand what had just shifted. But it didn't matter, because by the time he figured it out, it would already be too late. I closed my bedroom door softly and sat down on the edge of the bed, my hands resting on the walker. Carefully, I reached into the pouch and pulled out the recorder. For a moment, I just held it there, feeling its weight, knowing what it contained. Then I pressed play, and as David's voice filled the room once more, cold, certain, unaware, I realized something with absolute clarity. This wasn't just evidence, it was the truth he could no longer hide, and soon, everyone else would hear it too. I didn't call David back that night. I didn't respond to his messages the next morning either. 3 texts, 1 voicemail, all polite, all controlled, all just slightly more urgent than the last. "Mom, we should finish what we started. Let me know when you're ready. It's important we don't delay this." Important. That word had taken on a very different meaning now, because what was important to David was no longer important to me. What mattered now was timing, precision, and making sure that when the truth came out, it couldn't be twisted or denied. Evelyn had been clear about that. When you confront him, you don't give him space to reshape the narrative. So I waited, and I prepared. The meeting was set for the following afternoon, not at my house, not in his space, but in a place where control didn't belong to him. Evelyn's office. Marlene was there, Laura too, She had agreed to come hesitantly at first, but with a quiet understanding that this was no longer something she could stand outside of. Michael was not there. Not yet. This wasn't his moment. This was ours. David arrived 10 minutes late. Not unusual, but this time I noticed something in his walk as he entered. Confidence. But thinner now, more alert, as if he could sense somewhere deep down that something wasn't quite right. "Mom," he said, stepping into the room, his eyes moving quickly between me, Evelyn, and Marlene. "What's going on?" "Sit down, David," Evelyn said calmly. He frowned. "I'm asking my mother," he replied. "And she's asked me to be here," Evelyn said evenly. "So sit down." There was a pause, a brief standoff. Then slowly he pulled out the chair and sat. "What is this?" he asked, his tone tightening. I looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time since this began, I didn't see control. I saw uncertainty. "This," I said quietly, "is a conversation we should have had a long time ago." He leaned back slightly, his expression guarded now. About what I reached into my bag and placed the recorder on the table. Small, simple, unremarkable. But the moment his eyes landed on it, everything changed. His jaw tightened. "What is that?" he asked. I didn't answer. I just pressed play. The room filled with his own voice. Clear. Unmistakable. She didn't even question it. "She's slipping." He froze. Not dramatically, but completely. Every muscle in his body went still. Laura looked down, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Marlene remained silent. Evelyn watched, and I listened, just like I had before. But this time, he was listening too. The recording continued. "She'll sign today. Once that's done, everything else moves forward." "Turn that off," he said suddenly. I didn't. I let it play. Because this wasn't about his comfort. This was about truth. "She has no idea—" "Bella," he snapped, his voice sharp. "Now turn it off." I reached forward and pressed the button. Silence fell over the room. Heavy. Unavoidable. He exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "This is ridiculous," he said. "You're spying on me now I'm listening," I replied calmly. "That's not the same thing," he shot back. "No," I said, "it's not. Because listening requires truth." And for the first time, he had no control over it. "That recording doesn't prove anything," he continued quickly. "You're taking things out of context. Then explain it," Evelyn said. Her voice cut through the room with quiet authority. He turned toward her, irritation flashing across his face. "I don't need to explain anything," he said. "You do, if you want this to remain a civil matter," she replied. The words landed hard, because suddenly, this wasn't just family anymore. This was legal. I reached into my bag again. This time I pulled out the envelope, the one from Thomas. I placed it on the table beside the recorder. David's eyes flicked to it. And for the first time, I saw something new. Fear. "What's that?" he asked. "You tell me," I said. He didn't move, didn't reach for it, didn't even look directly at it for more than a second. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said. "Really?" I asked softly. I opened the envelope and slid the addendum across the table. "This was in your father's workshop," I said. "Hidden." Silence. His eyes scanned the page quickly. Too quickly, because he already knew what it said. "You removed the original copy," I continued. "Didn't you?" "That's not, don't lie," Laura said suddenly. Her voice was shaking, but it was firm. And that changed everything. David turned toward her, stunned. "You don't know what you're talking about," he said. "I know enough," she replied. "I always did." The room shifted again. Because now, he wasn't just facing me. He was facing both of us. "And I know what you did after Dad died," she added. "Going through his office, taking documents, hiding things. I was organizing. You were covering yourself," she said. Her voice broke slightly, but she didn't stop. "You knew he was going to expose you." She continued. "You knew what he found." His expression hardened. "That's not true," he said. "It is," Evelyn said calmly. She opened a folder and slid several documents onto the table. "Financial records," she said. "Unauthorized withdrawals, account movements, all tied to you." He stared at them, silent, cornered. "This is absurd," he said finally. "You're all turning this into something it's not." "No," I said quietly. I leaned forward slightly, my hand steady. "This is exactly what it is." He looked at me then. Really looked. And for the first time, he didn't see weakness. He saw something else. Resolve. "You tried to take control of my life," I said. "You tried to declare me incapable. You tried to erase your father's protections. I was trying to fix things. He snapped. At my expense, I asked. At everyone's expense if I didn't, he shot back. The truth. Finally, unfiltered. Laura flinched beside him. Marlene's expression tightened, and I simply nodded. Thank you, I said softly. For what he asked, confused. For saying it out loud, I replied, because now there was no room left for denial. Evelyn closed the folder in front of her. We will be proceeding with formal action, she said. You will be removed from any authority over the estate, and further legal steps will follow. David let out a bitter laugh. You think this is over, he said. I met his gaze. Yes, I said, because it is. And for the first time since this began, I meant it. Completely. The room didn't erupt after that. There was no shouting, no dramatic exit, no slamming of doors, just silence, the kind that follows something final. David didn't argue much after Evelyn spoke, not because he had accepted what was happening, but because he understood on some level that the ground beneath him had shifted in a way he couldn't immediately fix. He gathered his things slowly, his movements tight controlled. I want a copy of everything, he said. You'll receive what you're legally entitled to, Evelyn replied. He looked at me once before leaving, not with anger, not even with guilt, but with something colder, calculation. Then he walked out. And just like that, he was gone. The quiet that followed felt different from the silence that had filled my house after Thomas died. That silence had been heavy with loss. This one was heavy with truth. I sat there for a moment, my hands resting in my lap, the recorder still on the table beside the envelope. Marlene was the first to speak. You handled that well, she said gently. I nodded, but I didn't feel victorious, not the way I thought I might, because this wasn't just a battle I had won. It was something I had lost. Laura shifted beside me, her eyes still fixed on the door David had walked through. I didn't think it would feel like this, she said quietly, like what I asked. Empty, she replied. I understood that, more than I wanted to, because when truth comes out, it doesn't just expose lies, it changes everything around them. He made his choices, I said softly. Laura swallowed hard, nodding. I should have stopped him sooner, she said. I looked at her, really looked, not as someone who had betrayed me, but as someone who had failed, and knew it. Yes, I said. I didn't soften it. I didn't pretend otherwise, because honesty was the only thing left that mattered. You should have, I continued. But you didn't. Her eyes filled with tears. I was scared, she whispered. I know, I said. And I let him convince me that it was temporary, that we were just fixing things until everything settled. I didn't interrupt, because she needed to say it, all of it. I told myself it wasn't really hurting you, she continued, that we were helping, that it would all go back to normal once things were under control. She let out a small, broken laugh. But it wasn't helping, was it? No, I said. The word hung between us. Simple, unavoidable. I don't know how to fix this, she said. I leaned back slightly, my hands folding together. You don't fix it, I replied. She looked at me confused. What do you mean? I said, choosing my words carefully. You don't fix something like this all at once. You don't say the right thing or do the right thing and suddenly everything is okay again. Her shoulders slumped slightly. Then what do I do? You start with the truth, I said. She nodded slowly. And then she asked. And then I continued, you live with it. The weight of that settled over her, because that's the part no one talks about. The aftermath, the quiet, the consequences that don't go away just because the moment has passed. Marlene stood then, placing a gentle hand on my shoulder. I'll let Evelyn walk you through the next steps, she said. But you're in a strong position now. Strong. The word felt strange, but not wrong. After she left, Evelyn remained with us, outlining everything that would follow. Legal filings, asset protection, formal removal of David from any authority connected to the estate. It was structured, precise, controlled, exactly what I needed. Your accounts will be secured immediately, she said. We'll also ensure that no further evaluations or petitions can move forward without proper review. I nodded. And the documents he removed, I asked. We'll pursue that through civil action, she replied. What matters is that we now have evidence, both financial and recorded. The recorder, still sitting on the table, still holding his voice, his truth. And Laura, I asked. Evelyn glanced at her briefly. That depends on what role she chooses to take moving forward, she said. Laura straightened slightly. "I'll cooperate," she said quickly. "Whatever you need." Evelyn studied her for a moment, then nodded. "That will help," she said. When we returned home later that evening, the house felt different. Not lighter, not yet, but clearer, like something that had been clouding the air had finally lifted. Laura lingered in the kitchen while I sat in the living room, the walker beside me. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like it defined me. It had carried me through something, protected me, given me time, and in its own quiet way, it had become part of how I survived this. "I can stay tonight," Laura said from the doorway. "If you want." I looked up at her. She meant it. That much was clear. But I also knew something else. "No," I said gently. Her expression fell slightly. "Are you sure?" "Yes," I replied. I wasn't pushing her away, but I wasn't ready to let things return to what they had been either. Not yet. "Come by tomorrow," I added. "We'll talk more." She nodded slowly. "Okay." There was a pause. Then she stepped forward, hesitating for just a moment before wrapping her arms around me. It wasn't a perfect moment. It wasn't healing, but it was honest, and that was enough for now. Later that night, after she left, I sat alone in the living room, the same room where I had once felt lost, confused, afraid. But now, I understood. Not everything, not completely, but enough. Enough to know what had happened. Enough to know what needed to be done. And enough to know that I had not imagined any of it. I reached for the small envelope beside me, the one Thomas had left. Carefully, I opened it again, reading his words once more. "Trust that feeling." I let out a slow breath. "I did," I whispered, and for the first time since this began, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not relief, not yet, but something close, stability, because the truth, however painful, had given me something back. My footing, my voice, my control, and no one, not even my own son, was going to take that from me again. The days after the confrontation did not feel like victory. They felt like aftermath. There's a quiet that follows truth, one that doesn't comfort you, but instead asks you to sit with everything you now know. No distractions, no illusions, just clarity, and the weight that comes with it. For me, that quiet settled into the house almost immediately. David didn't come back. No calls, no messages, no attempts to explain or justify what had happened. It was as if he had stepped out of my life in the same controlled way he had tried to take it over deliberately and without looking back. That absence should have brought relief, but it didn't. Because absence, I realized, is not the same as peace. Laura kept her word. She came back the next morning, not with nervous energy this time, not with half-finished sentences or distracted glances, but with something else: honesty. She stood in the doorway for a moment before stepping inside as if giving me the chance to tell her to leave. I didn't. "Hi," she said quietly. "Hi," I replied. There was no performance between us now, no pretending that things were normal, and strangely, that made it easier. She joined me at the kitchen table, sitting across from me in the same chair David had used just days before. The contrast wasn't lost on either of us. "I didn't sleep much," she admitted. "Neither did I said. A small, understanding silence passed between us. Then she took a breath. "I need to tell you everything I know," she said. I nodded. "I'm listening. And this time," she didn't hold anything back. "It started earlier than I expected. Months before Thomas died. David had already begun struggling financially, but he kept it hidden. Not just from me, but from everyone. He didn't want to look like he failed, Laura said. Not to Dad, not to you. So he borrowed more, and then more again. Each decision built on the last, each one riskier than the one before it. He kept saying he just needed one deal to work," she continued. "One good outcome to fix everything. But it never came. Instead, the losses grew, and eventually, so did the desperation. Dad started noticing things," she said. "That matched what Evelyn had told me. He didn't accuse David directly," Laura explained, "but he asked questions about accounts, about transfers, about decisions that didn't make sense. I could picture it. Thomas sitting at his desk reviewing documents, his expression calm but focused. He wouldn't have raised his voice, he wouldn't have reacted emotionally, but he would have seen the pattern. And once he saw it, he wouldn't have ignored it. He was going to do something about it," Laura said softly. Yes, I replied, he was. There was a brief pause. Then Laura continued. David knew that. That part didn't surprise me anymore. What I didn't understand at the time, she added, was how much that scared him. Scared him, I asked. She nodded. He wasn't just worried about being exposed, she said. He was worried about what would happen after that. And what did he think would happen, I asked. He thought he would lose everything, she replied. Everything, his position, his control, his image. And after Dad died, she said, her voice lowering, that fear didn't go away. It got worse, because now there was no one left to stop him, except me. He told me we needed to move quickly, she continued, that things weren't as stable as they looked, that if we didn't secure everything, it could all collapse. And you believed him, I said. She hesitated. Not completely, she admitted, but enough. Enough to stay quiet. Enough to go along with it. Enough to let it happen. I kept telling myself it was temporary, she said, that once things settled, we'd fix it. That you'd never even know. I held her gaze. But you did know, I said. Her eyes filled again. Yes, she whispered. I knew something was wrong. We sat there in silence for a moment. Because that's where the truth lives, not in what we didn't know, but in what we chose not to face. I should have told you, she said. Yes, I replied. I should have stopped him. Yes, I should have. You should have done a lot of things, I said gently. She stopped, her breath catching. But you didn't, I continued. And now we're here. The words weren't cruel, but they were honest. And honesty was the only thing left worth holding on to. She wiped her eyes, quickly nodding. I don't expect you to forgive me, she said. I'm not thinking about forgiveness right now, I replied. She looked up surprised. Then what are you thinking about truth, I said. And I meant it, because forgiveness, without truth, is just another way of pretending. I need to know that what you're saying now is real, I continued. Not just something you say because everything has come out. It is, she said quickly. I studied her for a moment, then nodded. I believe you, I said. And that mattered, because belief was the first step, not the last. Later that afternoon, I called Michael, not to accuse, not to confront, but to understand. He answered on the second ring. Mom, hi, I said. There was a pause. I heard something happen, he said carefully. Of course he had. News travels fast in families? Yes, I replied. It did. Another pause. Longer this time. I should have paid more attention, he said quietly. The honesty surprised me. Why didn't you? I asked. He exhaled slowly. Because it was easier not to, he admitted. There it was. Not manipulation, not fear, comfort. I thought if I stayed out of it, things would work themselves out, he said. They didn't, I replied. No, he said. They didn't. We sat in that truth together for a moment. Then he spoke again. What do you need from me now? It was a simple question, but it meant something. Be present, I said. I can do that, he replied. And for the first time in a long while, I believed him. That evening, I sat alone in the living room again, but it felt different now. Not quiet in the same way, not heavy with uncertainty, but still reflective. Because this wasn't just about what David had done. It was about everything that had allowed it to happen. The silence, the assumptions, the willingness to look away, even my own. Because deep down, there had been moments when I felt something was wrong, and I had chosen comfort over confrontation, grief over awareness, hope over truth. Thomas hadn't done that. He had seen it, prepared for it, protected me from it as much as he could. But in the end, I had to face it myself. And now that I had, there was no going back. Only forward, with clarity, with boundaries, and with something I'd almost lost, myself. It's strange how life settles after something like that, not all at once, not in a clean, satisfying way, but slowly, quietly, in small, almost unnoticeable shifts. At first, the house felt unfamiliar. Even though nothing had changed physically, the same walls, the same furniture, the same soft creak of the hallway floor, it carried a different kind of silence. Not the silence of grief, not the silence of confusion, but the silence of truth. And truth, I've learned, has a sound of its own. It doesn't comfort you immediately. It doesn't wrap things up neatly. But it steadies you. It gives you something solid to stand on. And after everything that had happened, that was enough. The legal process moved forward exactly the way Evelyn said it would, quietly, efficiently, without drama. David was formally removed from any authority connected to the estate. His access to accounts was cut off. The documents he had tried to manipulate were reviewed, corrected, and secured. There were consequences, real ones, not loud, not public, but permanent, and that mattered, because for the first time, this wasn't about what he said. It was about what was proven. We didn't speak again, not after that day, and I won't pretend that it didn't hurt, because it did. There is a particular kind of pain that comes from realizing someone you love is capable of something you never imagined. It's not just betrayal, it's disorientation. Like the ground you thought you understood and was never as solid as you believed. But pain, I realized, doesn't mean you go back. It doesn't mean you undo the truth. It just means you carry it differently. Laura kept showing up, not perfectly, not easily, but consistently. And that was new. She didn't try to explain things away anymore. Didn't soften her role in what happened. She acknowledged it, sat with it, and over time, that began to matter. One afternoon, a few weeks later, she stood beside me in the kitchen while I made tea. "You don't look at me the same way," she said quietly. I didn't stop what I was doing. "No," I replied. She nodded slowly. "I don't expect you to." I poured the hot water, carefully watching the steam rise. "But I'm still here," she added. I turned, then meeting her eyes. "Yes," I said, and that was the truth. Trust doesn't come back all at once. It rebuilds in pieces. In presence, in consistency, in time. And Laura was starting that process. Michael visited more often, too. At first it was awkward, careful, like he wasn't sure what role he was supposed to play anymore. But gradually that changed. Not because everything was fixed, but because he chose to stay, to be present, to listen. And sometimes that's where healing begins, not in words, but in showing up. As for me, I changed in ways I didn't expect. Not dramatically, not outwardly, but internally. The walker, for example. For months I had seen it as a symbol of everything I had lost. Strength, independence, control. But now, I saw it differently. It had carried me through one of the most important moments of my life. It had given me time, position, access. It had allowed me to hear what I needed to hear, to understand what I needed to understand, and to act when it mattered most. So I stopped resenting it, stopped seeing it as a limitation, and started seeing it as what it really was, a tool, one that had helped me stand when everything else was shifting beneath me. A few months later, I found myself somewhere I never expected to be, standing in a small community center, speaking to a group of women, most of them my age, some older. They sat in folding chairs, listening quietly as I told my story. Not all of it, not every detail, but enough for them to understand. Sometimes I said, looking out at their faces, the people closest to you are the ones who think they know you best. A few heads nodded, and sometimes I continued, they mistake your kindness for weakness. More nods, but those are not the same thing. I let the words settle. Pay attention to what feels wrong, I said. Even if you can't explain it right away, even if no one else sees it, because I hadn't explained it at first. I had just felt it, and that feeling had saved me. Later that day, I visited Thomas. His grave sat beneath a large oak tree, the kind that held its ground no matter the season. I stood there quietly for a while, the wind moving gently through the branches above me. "I found it," I said softly. The words felt natural, like he could hear me. "Everything you left," I continued. "Everything you tried to protect." I took a slow breath. I didn't understand at first, I admitted. But I do now. The truth of that settled into me. Not heavy, not painful, just clear. "You were right," I said. "I am stronger than they think." A small smile touched my lips, and stronger than I thought, too. I stayed there a little longer, not because I needed to say more, but because I didn't. For the first time since he passed, there were no unanswered questions between us, no unfinished thoughts, just understanding. When I returned home, the house didn't feel quiet anymore. It felt steady. Not perfect, not healed completely, but grounded, and that was enough, because life doesn't go back to what it was. It moves forward, with everything you've learned, everything you've lost, and everything you've chosen to protect. I sat down in the living room, the walker beside me, not as something I leaned on, but something that had once carried me through a moment I didn't think I could survive. And I realized something simple, something that had been there all along. I hadn't lost my voice. I had just forgotten how powerful it was. But now, I remembered. And I wasn't going to forget again. There's a truth many people don't talk about, especially when it comes to family. We are taught to trust the people we love, to believe in them, to give them the benefit of the doubt, even when something doesn't feel right. And most of the time, that trust is a beautiful thing. But sometimes, it becomes the very thing that blinds us. What I learned through all of this is simple, but not easy. Love should never require you to ignore your instincts. Kindness should never come at the cost of your safety. And silence does not protect a family. It protects the person doing harm. If something feels wrong, don't dismiss it. Don't explain it away. Don't wait for someone else to confirm what you already feel inside. You don't need permission to protect yourself. Not from strangers, and not from your own family, because strength doesn't always look loud. Sometimes, it looks like listening. It looks like waiting. It looks like choosing the right moment to stand up and knowing exactly why you're doing it. If you've ever been in a situation where something didn't feel right, I'd love to hear your story. Where are you watching from? What time is it there right now? And if this story spoke to you even a little, don't forget to like and subscribe. You're not alone in this, and your voice matters more than you think.